I spent 36 years believing my husband was saving lives. Whenever Dr. Robert Mitchell missed Christmas, our anniversary, or one of our children's birthdays, I defended him. He's a surgeon, I would say. Someone out there needs him more than we do tonight. I was 60 years old when I discovered just how terribly right I was. One rainy Tuesday, Robert was seriously injured in a car accident, 2 hours in the opposite direction from the medical conference he claimed he was attending. I rushed to the hospital, terrified I might lose my husband. But when I walked into his room, a young woman was already sitting beside his bed, holding his hand. She had Robert's eyes, Robert's smile, and when he finally opened his eyes, she leaned closer and whispered, "Dad." I thought she had the wrong man. Then Robert looked at me. He looked at her, and the fear on his face told me everything. But the young woman wasn't the biggest secret my husband had been hiding, because over the next few days, I discovered that Robert hadn't simply been having an affair. For almost 20 years, my husband had been living another life, another woman, another daughter, another home, and the money paying for it? It was coming from the retirement fund I thought we were building together. But even that wasn't the most painful discovery, because when I finally met the other woman face to face, she looked me in the eyes and revealed something that made me question every year of my marriage. My husband hadn't just lied to two families. He had spent 20 years making sure we would never find each other. And when we finally did, Robert was about to learn that the women he had worked so hard to keep apart could become stronger together than they had ever been with him. Before I tell you how I discovered Robert's secret family, you need to understand why I never suspected him. My name is Diane Mitchell, and for most of my adult life, people told me I was one of the luckiest women they knew. I met Robert when I was 23. He was ambitious, charming, and already determined to become a surgeon. A year later, we were married, and I truly believed I had found the man I would grow old with. Back then, I had dreams of my own. I had studied interior design and had just been offered a position with a growing firm in Philadelphia. I loved creating beautiful spaces, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something that belonged entirely to me. Then our son, Daniel, was born. 3 years later, we welcomed our daughter, Emily. By then, Robert's medical career was demanding more and more of his time. Someone needed to hold our family together, and without ever really discussing what I might be giving up, that someone became me. I left my career. I told myself it was temporary. It wasn't. I raised our children, managed our home, hosted hospital fundraisers, remembered every birthday, and made excuses whenever Robert couldn't be there. And Robert was absent a lot. There was always a reason. An emergency surgery, a medical conference, a consultation in another state. Sometimes he returned with flowers or expensive gifts, and I mistook them for signs that he felt guilty about neglecting me. I was right about the guilt. I was simply wrong about the reason. Because years later, after everything fell apart, I looked back through our old calendars and noticed something that made my blood run cold. Robert's longest medical conferences hadn't happened randomly. For nearly 20 years, he had disappeared around the same dates. Every single year. And one of those dates was approaching again. Once I saw those dates on the old calendars, memories I had ignored for years began returning one by one. Every September, Robert disappeared for several days. Every February, there was almost always an urgent trip out of state. And sometime around late May, he became nearly impossible to reach for an entire weekend. There had always been an explanation. A conference. A complicated surgery. A patient who needed him. And because Robert was a respected surgeon, I never questioned him. Why would I? Our children admired their father. His colleagues respected him. The hospital featured him at charity events, and whenever someone praised his dedication, I felt proud to be his wife. I had spent decades believing I knew exactly who Robert Mitchell was. But about 6 months before the accident, something changed. It was subtle at first. Robert started carrying his phone everywhere. He took it into the shower. He placed it face down during dinner. One night, it rang just after 11. Robert looked at the screen and immediately stepped outside onto the porch. When he returned, I smiled and asked, "Secret patient?" For half a second, something changed in his expression. Then he smiled. Something like that. I laughed. Months later, those 3 words would haunt me. The morning of the accident, Robert packed a small suitcase and told me he was driving to Baltimore for a 2-day surgical conference. I helped him choose his favorite blue tie. Before leaving, he kissed my forehead. "Don't wait up tomorrow night," he said. "I may stay an extra day." A few hours later, my phone rang. Robert had been seriously injured in a car accident. But when the officer told me where they had found him, I stopped breathing. Robert wasn't anywhere near Baltimore. He had been driving in the opposite direction, toward Ohio. As I rushed to the hospital, one question repeated in my mind. Where had my husband really been going? When I finally entered his hospital room, I realized someone else already knew the answer. A young woman was sitting beside Robert's bed, and she was holding my husband's hand. For a moment, I simply stood in the doorway. Robert was unconscious, his face bruised, one leg heavily bandaged. Machines surrounded his bed, their steady beeping filling the silence. But all I could see was the young woman beside him. She couldn't have been more than 22. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and her eyes were swollen from crying. She was holding Robert's hand like she belonged there. I stepped closer. "Excuse me?" She quickly looked up. "Are you family?" I asked. The young woman hesitated. Then she looked at Robert. "I'm his daughter." I actually smiled. Not because anything was funny. My mind simply refused to understand what she had said.
"I'm sorry," he replied.
"You must have the wrong Robert Mitchell." Her eyebrows tightened. "Dr. Robert Mitchell?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "That's my dad." Something inside me went completely still. I stared at her more carefully, and then I saw them. Robert's gray-green eyes. The same eyes I had looked into for 36 years. "My name is Diane Mitchell," I said quietly. She waited. "I'm Robert's wife." The color drained from her face. His wife. For 36 years. Her hand immediately released his.
"No."
"That's impossible," my mother said. She stopped herself. "Your mother said what?" Before she could answer, Robert suddenly made a faint sound. His eyes slowly opened.
He looked at me.
Then he saw the young woman, and I watched something appear on my husband's face that I had never seen before.
Pure terror.
"Diane," he whispered. Then he turned toward her. "Claire?" My heart dropped. He knew her. Claire stared at him, tears filling her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me you were married?" Robert closed his eyes. But Claire wasn't finished. Her next question changed everything. "Does my mom know about her?" I looked at Robert, waiting for him to answer. He said nothing. And in that silence, I realized the young woman beside me wasn't the only secret I was about to discover. Somewhere in Ohio, there was another woman, and she might have known about me all along. Her name was Laura Bennett. I learned that while Robert was being taken into emergency surgery, Claire and I sat across from each other in a quiet hospital waiting room, 2 strangers connected by the same man, both trying to understand which parts of our lives had been real. Claire could barely look at me. "I swear I didn't know about you," she whispered. I believed her. She looked as shattered as I felt. Then she began telling me about her childhood. Robert had met Laura more than 20 years earlier. According to everything Claire had been told, Robert was divorced. His demanding career kept him traveling, which explained why he could never stay with them for long. The same career that explained his absence from my home had explained his absence from theirs. Then Claire opened her phone. "I need to show you something." The first photograph was Robert at her 10th birthday. The next showed him teaching her to ride a bicycle. Then came Christmas mornings, family dinners, vacations. A whole life I had never known existed. Finally, Claire showed me a photograph from her high school graduation. I recognized the date immediately. That weekend, Robert had told me he was performing emergency surgery in Cleveland. I remembered sending him a message that night. "I'm proud of you for always putting your patients first." He had replied with a heart. My hands began trembling. Then something in the background of the graduation photograph caught my attention. Large white house with green shutters. Where is that? I asked. Mom's house. Claire zoomed in, revealing the brass numbers beside the front door. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I had seen that address before. 2 years earlier, while reviewing one of our financial statements, I noticed regular payments connected to a property in Ohio. When I asked Robert about them, he told me they were part of an investment connected to our retirement portfolio. I believed him. Now I was staring at the house those payments had actually been supporting. Robert hadn't only given another woman his time. He had been using our money to build a life with her. And just as that realization hit me, Claire's phone rang. She looked at the screen. It's my mom. Claire answered. Mom, there's a woman here. Her name is Diane. There was a long silence. Then Claire's expression changed. Mom, another silence. Why aren't you surprised? Claire slowly lowered the phone and looked at me. My mother knows who you are. For several seconds, neither Claire nor I spoke. I could hear her mother's voice faintly through the phone, but I couldn't understand the words. Claire stood and walked toward the window. Mom, tell me the truth. Who is Diane Mitchell? Another long silence. Then Claire turned toward me. Her face had gone completely pale. She wants to come to the hospital. Laura arrived the following afternoon. The moment she walked into the waiting room, I knew who she was. She was elegant, composed on the outside, but her eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had been afraid of this moment for years. Claire didn't give her time to sit down. You knew Dad was married? Laura's eyes filled with tears. Not at first. Those 3 words cut through me. Not at first. Which meant eventually she had known. Laura explained that when she met Robert, he told her his marriage was over. He claimed we were separated and remained legally connected only because of our children and complicated finances. By the time Laura discovered Robert was still living with me, Claire was 4 years old. I told him I was leaving, she said. But you didn't, I replied. Laura lowered her eyes. No. Robert had convinced her that our marriage existed only on paper. He told her I knew about the relationship. He said I had accepted it. I almost laughed. Did he tell you I accepted spending Christmas alone too? Laura looked at me. He said you, and he hadn't celebrated holidays together in years. Suddenly, every missed Christmas came rushing back. Every empty chair. Every dinner I kept warm. Every lie I had defended. Robert hadn't just deceived 2 women. He had created 2 different versions of me. To Laura, I was the cold, distant wife who didn't care. To me, Laura didn't exist at all. Then Laura reached into her purse. There's something else. She placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a copy of Robert's will. My hands trembled as I read it. The Ohio house was promised to Laura. A large inheritance was promised to Claire. And the money behind both came from assets Robert had told me would fund our retirement. Then I saw the date beside his signature. 3 months ago. I stared at it. Robert hadn't been trapped by a mistake he'd made 20 years earlier. After all this time, he was still planning a future built on the same lie. That date changed something inside me. 3 months ago. Robert had signed that document 3 months ago, then come home, eaten dinner across from me, and talked about our retirement as if we were still planning the same future. This wasn't a mistake he had been too afraid to confess. It was a life he was actively protecting. That night, while Robert remained in the hospital, I called our financial advisor. For decades, Robert had handled most of our investments. I managed our household expenses, but retirement accounts and property investments were always, as he called them, his department. I had trusted him. Now I wanted to see everything. The statements arrived the next morning. I sat alone in the hospital cafeteria and began reading. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. Mortgage payments connected to Laura's Ohio home. Private school tuition. A college savings account in Claire's name. Vacations. Insurance payments. Transfers I had never noticed because they were scattered across different accounts. For nearly 20 years, Robert had been quietly financing another family with money earned during our marriage. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. I thought about the career I had abandoned. The years I spent raising our children while Robert built his reputation. The retirement I believed we had been building together. Then Claire found me. She saw the papers spread across the table and immediately understood. I didn't know, she whispered. I looked at her. For one painful second, anger rose inside me. Then I saw the fear in her face. Claire hadn't stolen my money. She hadn't made vows to me. She hadn't created this lie. Robert had. I slowly gathered the statements. I'm not blaming you. Claire's eyes filled with tears. My whole life was paid for with money he was hiding from you. That's his shame, I told her. Not yours. She sat beside me. For the first time, we weren't Robert's wife and Robert's secret daughter. We were simply two people trying to understand the same betrayal. Then my phone rang. It was my son, Daniel. I stared at his name on the screen and felt my heart sink. My children still knew nothing. They believed their father had simply been in an accident. They didn't know they had a sister. And I had no idea how to tell them that the man they had admired their entire lives had been lying to all of us for nearly 20 years. I answered Daniel's call with shaking hands. Mom, what's going on? Emily and I are on our way. How's Dad? For a moment, I couldn't speak. How was I supposed to explain that their father had survived an accident, but the family they thought they had was already gone? Just get here safely, I said. There's something we need to talk about. Daniel arrived first. Emily came 20 minutes later. I took them into a private waiting room. They were already frightened, expecting bad news about Robert's condition. Instead, I told them about Claire. Daniel stared at me. That's impossible. Emily shook her head. Dad would never do that. I understood. 24 hours earlier, I would have said the same thing. Then the door opened. Claire stepped inside. Nobody spoke. Daniel looked at her face, at those unmistakable gray-green eyes. And slowly, disbelief disappeared from his expression. This is Claire, I whispered. Your sister. Emily began crying. Daniel stood completely still. Claire looked terrified. I didn't know about you, she said quickly. Dad told me you knew I existed.
He said you didn't want to meet me.
Daniel's head snapped toward her. He said, what? Another lie. Robert hadn't only kept his children apart. He had made Claire believe Daniel and Emily had rejected her before they had ever known her name. Emily wiped her tears. How long? Claire swallowed. I'm 22. The room went silent. 22 years. Daniel walked toward the window, his hands clenched. Then he asked the question I had been afraid to answer. Mom, did you know?
No.
He turned around. I saw something break in my son's face. For the first time, Daniel wasn't looking at me as his mother. He was looking at me as another person his father had betrayed. Claire quietly said, I'm sorry. Daniel looked at her. You didn't do this. Those 4 words changed everything. Because instead of blaming Claire, my children understood what had taken me hours to understand. There was only one person responsible for keeping them apart. Their father. Later that evening, the 3 of them sat together outside Robert's room. Daniel,
Emily, Claire.
3 siblings meeting for the first time because their father could no longer keep them separated. Then Robert opened his eyes and saw all 3 of his children standing together. The fear on his face returned. He knew the moment he had spent 20 years avoiding had finally arrived. And this time, none of us were leaving until he told us the truth. Robert stared at the 3 children standing beside his hospital bed. Daniel, Emily,
Claire.
For the first time in 22 years, every part of his secret life was in the same room. Nobody spoke. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. How long were you planning to keep lying to us? Robert looked at me as if he wanted me to rescue him. For 36 years, that was what I had done. I had defended his absences, protected his reputation, explained away every missed birthday and holiday. Not anymore. Answer your son, I said. Robert lowered his eyes. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. Daniel gave a bitter laugh. So you lied to everyone instead? Claire stepped forward. You told me they knew about me. Robert looked at her. I thought it would be easier. For who? Emily asked. He had no answer. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me since Laura showed me the will. If the accident hadn't happened, when were you going to tell us? Robert remained silent. Next year, I continued. 5 years from now, on your deathbed, still nothing. And suddenly I understood. You were never going to tell us. Robert's eyes filled with tears. Diane,
No.
just tell me the truth once. He looked at all of us. Finally, he whispered, I didn't know how to choose. Those words hit me harder than I expected.
Choose.
As though we had spent decades competing in a contest none of us knew existed. You chose every day, I said quietly. Every time you lied, you chose yourself. Robert began crying. He tried to explain that when Claire was born, Daniel and Emily were still young. He couldn't abandon either family, so he convinced himself that keeping the secret was protecting everyone. But Claire shook her head. You didn't protect me. You made me believe my own brother and sister didn't want me. Emily reached for Claire's hand. Robert watched them. Two daughters who should have met decades earlier were standing together because his lies had finally failed. Then Daniel asked one last question. Was there ever a time you were actually going to confess? Robert looked away. That tiny movement told me something. There was more. I stepped closer. Robert, what aren't you telling us?
His face changed.
And that was when I realized my husband hadn't simply thought about confessing. At some point in those 20 years, Robert had come dangerously close to telling me everything. But something or someone had stopped him. Robert wouldn't answer me. Not with Daniel, Emily, and Claire standing there. He simply closed his eyes and said he was tired. For once, I didn't push him, because the look on his face had already told me there was another secret. The answer came 2 days later. Claire called me early in the morning. Diane, I found something. She had gone back to her mother's house to collect a few clothes. While searching through an old box of photographs Robert had kept there, she discovered a sealed envelope. My full name was written across the front. Diane Mitchell. The handwriting was Robert's. When Claire brought it to the hospital, my hands trembled before I even opened it. The letter was dated 18 years earlier. I began reading. Robert had written everything.
Laura. Claire.
The years of deception. He said he couldn't continue living two lives. He wrote that after Daniel graduated from high school, he planned to sit me down and finally tell me the truth. But the letter had never been mailed. Daniel graduated. Then Emily did. Our children built lives of their own. Robert and I celebrated anniversaries. We talked about retirement. And for 18 more years, he continued lying. I walked into Robert's room and placed the letter beside him. The moment he saw it, his face went pale. You wrote this.
He stared at the envelope.
Where did you find it? That doesn't matter. I sat across from him. You had 18 years to tell me. Robert's voice broke. I was afraid. Of losing me? He nodded. But for the first time, I understood him clearly.
No, Robert.
You were afraid of losing the version of yourself everyone admired.
He looked at me.
You needed me to believe you were a devoted husband. You needed Laura to believe you were trapped in an unhappy marriage. You needed your children to believe you were a good father. My voice began trembling. You didn't love two families too much to choose. You loved being loved by both. Robert started crying. Then he whispered, I'm going to lose everything. I looked at the man I had once trusted more than anyone in the world.
No, Robert.
You already had everything. You just believed you could keep lying forever. I stood to leave. But before I reached the door, Robert said something that stopped me. Diane, there's something about the money you still don't know. I slowly turned around, and from the fear in his eyes, I knew the financial statements I had already discovered were only part of the truth. I turned back toward Robert. What do you mean? There's something I don't know? For several seconds, he couldn't look at me. Then he finally admitted it. The money he had spent maintaining his second family hadn't all come from his income. Over the years, Robert had quietly withdrawn from investments we had planned to use for retirement. When those withdrawals became too difficult to hide, he borrowed against assets connected to our home. My home. The place where I had raised our children. The place I believed was completely secure. How much? I asked. Robert gave me a number. I felt sick. The future I thought we had carefully built was nowhere near as safe as he had led me to believe. You let me plan retirement knowing this? I thought I could replace it. When? He had no answer. I thought about every sacrifice I had made. I had left my career when Daniel was born because Robert said our family needed me. I had supported him through medical training, long nights, and years of building his reputation. And while I was protecting our home, Robert had been quietly risking it to protect his lies. Something inside me finally became clear. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life cleaning up the consequences of his choices. Robert reached toward me. Diane, please. When I get out of here, we can fix this.
We.
He froze. There is no we anymore. His face crumbled. For the first time, I said the words aloud. I am ending our marriage. Robert began crying. Diane, I'm injured. I can't even take care of myself. The old version of me would have immediately felt responsible. But I was beginning to understand the difference between compassion and surrender. I won't leave you without medical care, I said. I'll make sure your doctors arrange what you need. He looked hopeful for half a second. But you're not coming home with me. His expression collapsed. I walked out of the room with tears running down my face. I had loved that man for 36 years. Walking away didn't suddenly erase that love. It simply meant I had finally decided that loving him could no longer require losing myself. Outside the room, Claire was waiting. She had heard enough to understand. Without saying a word, she wrapped her arms around me. And there, in the hospital hallway, I cried in the arms of the daughter my husband had hidden from me for 22 years. Neither of us knew it yet, but that moment would become the beginning of a relationship Robert had spent her entire life making sure we never had. Claire held me in that hospital hallway until I finally stopped crying. When we pulled apart, she wiped her own tears. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shook my head. You have nothing to apologize for. But my whole life exists because Dad betrayed you. Those words broke my heart. Claire, look at me.
She did.
You are not responsible for the circumstances that brought you into this world. Robert made his choices. Your mother made hers. But you were a child. For years, Robert's lies had created an invisible wall between us. I was supposed to be the woman Claire believed didn't want her. And she was supposed to be the daughter whose existence destroyed my marriage. But neither story was true. Over the next few weeks, while Robert began rehabilitation, Claire and I started talking. At first, our conversations were uncomfortable. Then she told me about birthdays Robert had attended. I told her about the family events he had missed on those exact days. Slowly, we reconstructed 20 years of his double life. One February, Robert told me he was attending a medical conference. He had actually taken Claire skiing. Another year, he missed Emily's birthday because Claire had been hospitalized with pneumonia. Every memory he gave one family had often required a lie to the other. But the most painful revelation came when Claire showed me photographs from her childhood. In almost every picture with Robert, she was holding on to him tightly. I used to cry whenever he left, she admitted. He always promised that someday he wouldn't have to go. I realized then that Claire hadn't received the better version of Robert. She had spent her entire childhood waiting for him too. One afternoon, she asked me quietly, "Do you think I'm stupid because I still love him?"
No.
But after everything he did, you can love someone and still hold them responsible for hurting you. She looked down. I don't know what he's supposed to be to me anymore. Neither did I. Then Claire told me something unexpected. Robert had promised her for years that she would eventually meet Daniel and Emily. According to him, her siblings already knew she existed. They just aren't ready to accept you, he had told her. Claire had spent years believing my children had rejected her. That evening, I called Daniel. Your sister needs you. He was silent. Then he said, half-sister. Daniel, Robert has already stolen 22 years from all three of you. I paused. Don't let his lies steal another 22. 3 days later, Daniel invited Claire to dinner. And what happened around that table made me realize that while my marriage was ending, something entirely unexpected was beginning. 3 days later, Claire stood outside Daniel's house, too nervous to knock. I was beside her. You don't have to stay, she whispered. I know. I stayed anyway. When Daniel opened the door, there was an awkward silence. Then Emily appeared behind him. For a moment, the three siblings simply looked at one another. 22 years of stolen time stood between them. Finally, Daniel stepped aside.
Come in, Claire.
Those 3 words were enough to make her cry. Dinner began quietly. Nobody knew which questions were safe. Then Emily asked Claire where she went to college.
Daniel asked about her job.
Claire told them stories about growing up in Ohio. Slowly, the tension softened. Then something strange happened. They started comparing memories. Claire mentioned a Christmas when Robert surprised her with a bicycle. Emily froze. What year? Claire told her. Emily looked at me. That was the Christmas Robert claimed a patient had suffered complications after surgery. We had waited until nearly midnight before opening gifts without him. Another memory. Another lie. Then Daniel mentioned his high school championship game. Robert had missed it because of a medical emergency.
Claire's face changed.
That weekend, he took Mom and me to Chicago. The table went silent. For years, Robert had moved between our lives like an actor changing costumes. But now the people he had deceived were finally comparing scripts. And every story exposed another lie. Claire started crying. I feel like I stole him from you. Emily immediately reached across the table. You didn't steal anyone. Daniel nodded. He made those choices. I watched Claire's shoulders relax. For the first time, she wasn't being treated like Robert's secret. She was simply their sister. Later that evening, I stood in the kitchen watching the 3 of them laugh over an embarrassing childhood story. It should have made me happy. Instead, I suddenly felt furious. Robert had stolen this from them. 22 birthdays. 22 Christmases. A lifetime of knowing one another. As Claire prepared to leave, she hugged Daniel. Then Emily. Finally, she hugged me. I never thought I'd have this, she whispered. Neither did I. But when I returned home that night, there was a voicemail waiting from Laura. Her voice was tense. Diane, we need to talk about Claire. I called her back. Laura answered immediately. And the first words she said stunned me. I think you need to stop seeing my daughter. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood Laura. What did you say? I think you should stop seeing Claire. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the fear underneath it. Laura, Claire is 22 years old. She decides who she sees. She's my daughter, Diane. I know that. Then stop acting like you're her mother. That hurt. Not because I wanted Laura's place. I didn't. But after everything Robert had done, I couldn't understand why she was turning her anger toward me. The next day, I asked Laura to meet me. We chose a small restaurant halfway between our homes. The moment she sat down, I could see she had been crying. Claire talks about you constantly now, she said. She talks about Daniel, Emily, your family. They're her family too. Laura looked away. And where does that leave me? Suddenly, I understood.
This wasn't really about me.
Laura was terrified. For 22 years, Claire had been the one part of Robert's complicated life that belonged entirely to her. Now Claire had discovered siblings, another family, and a connection with the wife Laura had spent years trying not to think about. I am not trying to take your daughter, I said. Laura's eyes filled with tears. Then what are you doing? I'm trying not to punish her for something she didn't do. The table went quiet. Then I said the words both of us had avoided. Robert lied to me for nearly 20 years. Laura lowered her head. And after you discovered I existed, you stayed with him. She nodded slowly. I did. That hurt me, Laura. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. I'm sorry. For the first time, her apology felt real. But Robert made vows to me. I continued. Robert created 2 lives. Robert kept our children apart. I leaned closer. Why are we still allowing him to make us enemies? Laura began crying. And something inside me softened. I didn't forgive everything in that moment. Healing doesn't happen that easily. But I finally saw Laura clearly. Not as the woman who had stolen my husband. As another woman who had spent years believing the version of reality Robert needed her to believe. Before we left, Laura asked one question. Do you think Claire has room for both of us? I reached across the table. She shouldn't have to choose. Months later, Those words would bring all of us into the same room. Laura,
Claire.
Daniel, Emily, and me. Everyone Robert had spent decades keeping apart. Everyone except Robert himself. But none of us knew that while we were finally learning how to become a family, Robert was watching from a distance. Months passed after my conversation with Laura. Nothing changed overnight. There were still uncomfortable moments. There were questions none of us knew how to answer. But slowly, something began to shift. Claire continued seeing Daniel and Emily. Sometimes they invited me. Eventually, they invited Laura too. The first time all 5 of us sat together, the silence was almost unbearable. Then Daniel made a joke about Robert's terrible taste in music.
Claire laughed.
Emily added another story. And somehow, the tension cracked. That Christmas, Daniel invited everyone to his home. Laura almost didn't come, but Claire convinced her. I arrived early and helped Emily prepare dinner. Claire brought dessert. Laura stood awkwardly in the kitchen until I handed her a stack of plates. Can you help me with these? She looked surprised. Then she smiled. Of course. It was such a small moment, but after everything that had happened, it felt enormous. Later, I stood near the dining room and watched them. Daniel was showing Claire childhood photographs. Emily was laughing beside them. Laura was listening to a story about a family vacation Robert had once missed. For the first time, I realized something extraordinary. The people Robert had spent 22 years keeping separated were sitting around the same table.
Not because of him.
In spite of him. Then I noticed a car parked across the street. My heart tightened. I recognized it. Robert. I quietly stepped outside. He was sitting behind the wheel, staring through Daniel's front window. When he saw me, he lowered the window. Daniel didn't invite me, he said.
No.
Pain crossed his face. I just wanted to see everyone. I looked back toward the house. Through the window, Claire was laughing with Emily. Daniel was talking to Laura. Robert followed my eyes. They look happy, he whispered. They're trying to heal. He nodded slowly. Then he said something that stunned me. I always thought if all of you met, everything would fall apart. I looked at him. That's why you kept lying? I told myself I was protecting everyone. No, Robert.
My voice was calm now.
You were protecting yourself from the consequences. Tears filled his eyes. Then he asked the question I never expected. Do they hate me? I didn't answer immediately. Finally, I said, I don't know. He looked directly at me. Do you? For the first time, I realized I knew the answer. And it wasn't the answer either of us expected. Robert waited for my answer. 3 years earlier, I might have believed that hatred was the opposite of love. Now I knew better. No, I finally said. Robert looked surprised. I don't hate you. For a moment, something almost like hope appeared on his face. But I continued. I hate what you did. I hate the years you stole from me. I hate that our children lost 22 years with their sister because you were too afraid to tell the truth. His eyes dropped. But I don't want to spend whatever years I have left carrying hatred for you. Robert reached through the open window as if he wanted to take my hand. I stepped back. Forgiveness did not mean returning. Compassion did not mean reconciliation. And healing did not require giving the person who hurt me access to my life again. I am sorry, Diane, he whispered. For once, I didn't hear an excuse after the apology. Maybe he finally understood. Maybe he didn't. Either way, it was no longer my responsibility to change him. I turned toward the house. Diane, I stopped. Did you ever love me? The question broke something open inside me. I looked back at the man I had married at 24. Yes, Robert. My voice trembled. That's why it hurt so much. Then I walked inside. Claire noticed me first. Was that Dad? I nodded. She looked toward the window. For a moment, I thought she might run outside. Instead, she reached for my hand. Laura saw her. Without saying anything, she placed her hand over Claire's. Then Emily joined us. 4 women, connected by one man's choices, but no longer controlled by them. Across the room, Daniel watched quietly. There was sadness in his eyes, but there was peace too. Robert had spent decades believing that if we discovered one another, We would destroy each other. Instead, the truth had given us something his lies never could. A choice. Claire could love her father without defending what he had done. Laura could face her mistakes without competing with me. My children could know their sister. And I could finally build a life that belonged to me. As we sat down for Christmas dinner, I looked at the empty chair at the end of the table. For years, Robert's absence had made me feel incomplete. That night, for the first time, it didn't. Because I finally understood something. Sometimes losing the person you thought you needed is how you discover the people who were meant to stay. And my story wasn't ending with Robert's betrayal. In many ways, my life was only beginning. 3 years have passed since the accident that exposed Robert's secret life. Robert and I are divorced now. His life is much quieter than it used to be. He completed his rehabilitation, but the respected surgeon who once seemed larger than life never fully returned to the world he had controlled so carefully. Daniel and Emily speak to him occasionally. Claire sees him more often. And I'm okay with that. Robert is still their father. Their relationship with him belongs to them, just as my decision to leave belonged to me. Laura and I never became best friends. Some wounds don't disappear simply because people finally tell the truth. But we are no longer enemies. We learned that we could acknowledge the pain between us without allowing Robert's choices to define every interaction we had. And Claire? Claire became something I never expected. Family. Last Christmas, she came to my home with Daniel and Emily. I stood in the kitchen watching the three of them argue over which Christmas song to play while preparing dessert. They were laughing, teasing one another, acting like siblings. I felt tears fill my eyes. 22 years. That's how much time Robert's lies had stolen from them. But he didn't get to steal the years ahead. Later that evening, Claire sat beside me near the fireplace. Diane? Yes. Do you ever wish you had never found out? I thought about the woman I had been before that rainy Tuesday. The woman who defended every absence, who believed every conference, who had slowly built her entire identity around being Dr. Robert Mitchell's wife. The truth had broken that woman's heart, but it had also set her free. No, I said. Claire looked surprised. Why? I smiled through my tears. Because the truth took away the life I thought I had. I reached for her hand, but it gave me my own life back. I lost my marriage. I lost the future I thought was guaranteed. But I found the woman I had forgotten beneath 36 years of sacrifice. My children found a sister. And 3 women who had every reason to blame one another finally understood where the responsibility truly belonged. Sometimes healing begins when betrayed, people stop fighting each other and hold the liar responsible. And sometimes, the people someone worked hardest to keep apart become the very people who help each other survive the truth. My name is Diane Mitchell. I was 60 years old when I discovered my husband's second family. I thought that day was the end of my life. I was wrong. It was the day I finally began living it for myself.